Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the high-stakes, honestly pretty dramatic reality of modern border demarcation. We so often think of national boundaries as just permanent ink on a map. But out there on the ground, the reality is completely different. We're going to explore how borders aren't just pieces of paper. They're living, constantly shifting battlegrounds. And crucially, we'll look at the exact technical and diplomatic methods that nations actually use to resolve these super complex disputes. Think about that quote for a second. Missing boundary pillars, vanished no man's lands. Geography has real, messy, physical consequences. When a river just decides to change its course, or boundary markers completely erode away, that border is no longer a static line. It becomes this living entity that's manipulated by nature, local populations, and high-level politics. The visceral reality of a vanished no man's land means everyday people's lives and national sovereignty itself are directly impacted. So here's our agenda for today. 1. The living, shifting borders. 2. Anchoring the northern frontier. 3. The southern river disputes. 4. The cartographic battlefield. And finally, 5. Joint boundary mechanisms. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The living, shifting borders. Let's examine Nepal's incredibly unique geographic reality. Now, Nepal is a landlocked sovereign state, sitting right between two absolute giants, China up to the north and India to the east, west, and south. In fact, our sources note that Nepal is often described as being India-locked, sharing this massive, highly porous 1,880-kilometer open border with India. And this geography, it literally sets the stage for everything we're about to discuss. What this creates is a stark geographical contrast. On the northern frontier, Nepal is shielded by the massive natural wall of the Himalayas. It's imposing, it's naturally defined. But look at the southern border. It's an extension of the flat Indo-Gangetic Plain. There are no massive stone walls here. Instead, you've got these porous plains and riverine zones where rivers literally change their course, taking the border right along with them. Section 2. Anchoring the northern frontier. Let's talk about empirical surveying. Okay, the 1961 Nepal-China Boundary Treaty is a stunning example of treaty fidelity. Following an initial 1960 agreement, these two nations put together a treaty that let joint teams amicably resolve 32 pre-existing disputed spots, including some highly sensitive areas right near Mount Everest. And the crazy part? They pulled this off in just a few short years of really intense cooperative fieldwork. They relied purely on scientific surveying rather than political posturing. By adjusting the land based on traditional use and a really pragmatic give-and-take principle, these joint boundary mechanisms established 99 boundary pillars across 1,439 kilometers. Nepal gave up some territory, China gave up some territory, and the end result has been a remarkably stable border without any significant post-demarcation drama to this very day. Moving on to Section 3. The Southern River Disputes. Time to look at the Sugauli legacy. To actually understand the friction in the South, we have to talk about a specific international legal principle called uti possidetis juris. Basically, this is the legal rule stating that post-independent states inherit the exact boundaries established by former colonial powers. Because the boundaries handed down to India and Nepal were literally drawn by the British back in the 19th century, understanding and legally interpreting those exact colonial-era documents is the absolute core of today's disputes. And that brings us to the Kalapani territorial dispute, which is intensely complex. It hinges almost entirely on differing interpretations of the 1816 Sugauli Treaty between Nepal and the British East India Company. The treaty clearly states that the Kali River is the boundary, but here's the catch. The true origin of that river is heavily contested, which ends up enclosing over 335 square kilometers of highly strategic disputed land. So we have two very different geographical views here. Impartially speaking, Nepal asserts that the Kali River actually originates further west at Limpiandora, backing this up with archival 19th century British maps and hydrological surveys. India, on the other hand, maintains the origin is further east at Kalapani, supporting their stance with administrative control records and mid-20th century maps. These differing interpretations lead to drastically different cartographic claims that genuinely impact real-world geopolitical dynamics. Section 4. The cartographic battlefield. So, how do experts actually solve these massive geographic discrepancies? Well, they definitely don't just draw lines by hand anymore. Let's look at the methodology championed by border expert Budi Narayan Shrestha. It's a highly technical three-step method. Step 1 is documentary preparation, gathering up those original 1816 archival treaties. Step 2 is delimitation, legally defining the boundary based strictly on the original treaty's intent. And step 3 is demarcation. This is where you actually go out and ground truth the borders using geodetic surveying, historical triangulation networks, and modern sub-meter GPS and GIS technology. The overarching theme from our sources is crystal clear here. Cartographic manipulation absolutely holds no legal validity without a bilateral treaty. You can't just unilaterally change a map or build infrastructure to legally establish sovereignty. Both sides fully recognize that strict empirical evidence, meaning tracing modern coordinates all the way back to historical masonry pillars, and joint ground truthing are absolutely paramount to finding a lasting legal resolution. Which brings us to Section 5. Joint boundary mechanisms, diplomacy in action. At the end of the day, bilateral relations and mutual dialogue are really the only viable paths forward. Our sources emphasize that both India and Nepal have repeatedly expressed the commitment to resolving these sensitive issues through established diplomatic channels. In fact, India has explicitly rejected any third-party mediation. They're reinforcing that this is a strictly bilateral matter, requiring mutual dialogue, joint field surveys, and shared technical data. So let's dive into the specifics of these diplomatic mechanisms. On one hand, you have the Boundary Working Group, or BWG. This group is strictly technical. We're talking surveyors and engineers mandated to locate missing pillars, repair broken ones, and physically clear the no man's land. Contrast that with the Eminent Persons Group, or EPG. The EPG was designed at a much higher political level to comprehensively review broader bilateral relations and directly address the underlying trust deficit between the two nations. And here's a number that's just incredible: 97%. The Nepal-India Joint Technical Level Boundary Committee has successfully demarcated 97% of the entire 1,880-kilometer border over 26 years. They jointly installed thousands of boundary pillars. This proves definitively that when empirical surveying is combined with joint diplomatic mechanisms, they yield immense, tangible results for peace.
However, that remaining 3%, that is the major sticking point. This small percentage includes highly complex, emotionally charged riverine zones like Susta and the Kalapani region we talked about earlier. These are the areas where shifting rivers, missing colonial markers, and differing treaty interpretations test the absolute limits of modern diplomacy. Technical experts can provide all the GPS coordinates in the world, but resolving this final 3% requires immense political will from the highest levels of government.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're really left with a profound question. Can human cartography ever truly tame a changing natural world without total political trust? We've seen the incredible precision of GPS and joint technical teams today, but when rivers literally shift and colonial maps clash, lines drawn on paper just aren't enough. It requires absolute, unwavering bilateral trust to govern human action. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the lines that define our world.